on. When you heat this, there's a good chance that contents are going to spill over. They'll get between the lid and the jar, and then the seal will fail. So that's too much is not good. Too little is not good. How about if you do too much?
You have trapped some kind of like mold or something in there.
Right?
On botulism.
Yeah. Well, botulism, remember, is only going to be in the low acid ones that you do in the pressure canner. Anything you do in here, you don't have to worry about botulism. But you could get mold, for sure, or other type of bacteria. The problem with too much headspace is that when you process this for whatever the recommended time is, whether it's 15 minutes or 20 minutes, part of that processing time is causing the air that's in that space to be funneled out, kind of between the edge of the jar and the lid, so that when it cools, the lid gets sucked down and forms that vacuum seal. So if you have too much headspace, what can happen is you cannot get the proper seal on the jar. And so that's why it's always important to make sure you measure that headspace. Of course, place the lids on the jar, screw it in, and then as I say, just do it so it's finger tight. You don't want to really crank down on it, it's just finger tight. When you process these, you may find that when they come out of the canner that the screw band is loose. That often happens. Just leave it alone. You do not retighten the lid or the screw band. You just sort of leave it there, let it sit, and that seal will still, the jar will still seal. You don't need the screw band to push down on it to cause it to seal. And then process the jars according to the recipe. So let me see here. Let me just go this here. All right. One of the things you want to do when you put your jars in is you want to always make sure that there's at least an inch of water above the top of the jars. The reason for that is you want that hot water around the whole jar, not just the bottom part of the jar, because that helps with sealing. So at least an inch or 2 inches above it. You want to set the timer after the water comes to a boil, or when it comes back to a boil. So when you put your jars in and you take the lid off, oftentimes what will happen is it will stop boiling. It'll still be really hot, but it'll stop boiling. So you put your jars in, you put your lid back on, of course not with your hands, you use the lifter. Put the lid back on, and then I usually just kind of peek under there every so often to see if it's come back to a rapid boil. Once it has, that's when I start my timing for my processing. Now, a lot of times people don't realize this, but because this is fairly new, that after you're done processing it, what you should do is take the lid off the canner, turn off the heat, and then you let the jars just sit in there for about 5 minutes. And what happens there is the boiling water kind of calms down, and oftentimes the contents of the jars will be boiling. So if you lift them out while they're still boiling, again, that can interfere with the seal on the jar. So Ball now recommends that you just let it sit in there for about another 5 minutes, so things cool down a little bit, adjust a little bit, then you can take them out and then let them cool on the counter. You want to let them sit for about 12 to 24 hours and then check to make sure your jars have sealed. I typically find, though, when I take the jars out of the canner, that within maybe 10, sometimes even faster, 15 minutes, depends. As they sit there, you hear this wonderful music in your kitchen. And if you can, you know that little click, click, and it just sort of goes, it's just this wonderful little high-pitched click. And that's a great sound because that means my jars are sealing, and so that I have a good seal. So, but it's always good after the 12 to 24 hours to check to make sure that, yes, in fact, that they did seal properly. Because if they didn't, because if they didn't, you can reprocess them within 24 hours, so you can do that if they haven't sealed. But when you store them, you'll notice that all of my jars here do not have the screw bands on them. Anybody know why you want to take the screw bands off and store them this way as opposed to with them on like this?
You don't really need them on there.
What?
You don't really need them on there.
Right, you don't need them on there, right? Because this is sealed. This isn't going anywhere. So I don't have to worry about having the screw band on there. Anybody have any idea why you take the screw bands off?
So you stretch them maybe?
No, it's not that. It's what can happen is you can get water in between the screw bands here. sometimes it can rust, and if it rusts, that could interfere with your seal on your jar. So that's one thing. The other thing is sometimes liquid or food will come out of the jar. It'll still seal fine, and it'll be okay, but you get food caught on the edge here, and if you have the screw band on and you don't know what's under there, that can all mold and then cause the seal to fail. It was interesting. I was judging canned goods recently, and a lot of the, well, because they didn't specify it, but a lot of the canned goods still had the screw bands on. And one of the things I found was in some of them, was especially like the jams, it was really hard to get the screw band off because they were really kind of stuck on there. And then when I took the band off, there was all this black mold around the edge there, So it really was not very appetizing to look at that. So that's another reason is you take the band off, then you can clean the jars, and then that it's not going to mold. I would store them in your cupboard like this, but then if you want to give them as a gift, then you can put the screw band back on, because the person's going to want to be able to reseal the jar once it's open. So that's fine to give it as a gift, but just tell them, take the screw band off, you don't have to keep it on there.
So you're saying once that sets, that lid sets, then you can take the band off and you want to...
Right, within that 12 to 24 hours, just take it off. And these you can reuse. However, if they get really rusty inside, I would say just put them in a recycle bin and get some new ones. You always want to label and date it. This is blueberry jam, and it says 7/13, so I'm coming up to just about a year. So I should, use this, well, it's past a year actually. So I really want to use this pretty soon. If I wait past a year and there's still a good seal and there's no mold, no signs of, it, spoiling, I can still use this jam. So it's not like it's not safe, but it's probably not going to taste as good as when I first did it, back last July. So they recommend that you use it within a year.
What is the shelf life on something like that once you open that up?
For jams and jellies, they go for a couple months. Usually if they've been in there too long, they get kind of moldy on the top. And with mold actually has like roots that go down into the jelly. They used to say, well, just scoop off the mold and you'll be fine, you can use that. But those roots have mycotoxins which can cause cancer. So now they recommend that if you do have moldy jelly, just throw it away and use a new jar. And that applies to any commercial brand too. So a couple of months, it just depends. The pickles, again, that's probably 3 to 4 months. I would say would be the best.
You said use a new jar. You mean get a new jar of jelly? The jar itself can be sterilized.
Oh yes, it can. Yes, right. Yes. All right. When you process foods, if you're above 1,000 feet, but I think if everybody's from this area, you don't have to worry. Water boils at a lower temperature at higher altitudes. So you have to adjust your processing time as a result if you're above 1,000 feet, but we don't have to worry about that area. Okay, so tonight, I do not have a stove and a kitchen. Well, I guess I could have gone in there, but typically I don't have a kitchen to actually demonstrate how to do some canning. So I have a video that I'd like to show. It's about 8 minutes. It's from Ball. Ball is, as I say, is another very reputable resource for canning recipes. And so I'm going to show that. So for those of you who've never canned before, you can kind of get an idea of how the whole process goes. And then for those of you who have canned, you might pick up a few techniques of just how to improve your canning process a little better.
The flavor of sun-ripened tomatoes straight from the vine. I'm Lauren Devine, and today I'm going to show you how, right in the Ball Test kitchen. Let's get started. Learn the basics for home canning sun-ripened garden tomatoes with Ball brand fresh preserving products. Tomatoes are bountiful in your garden come summertime. Home canning is a great way to preserve the fresh flavor to have throughout the year. Let us show you how. Today we are going to can tomatoes in Ball brand wide mouth quart jars. Before beginning, read through your tested preserving recipe, such as one found in the Ball Blue Book Guide to Preserving, Ball Complete Book of Home Preserving, or on our website at freshpreserving.com. Also, it is helpful to assemble and organize the equipment for your recipe. Today we will be using a boiling water canner with a lid and a home canning rack, clean glass preserving jars with lids and bands, a large deep saucepan with wire basket for blanching your tomatoes, or you can use a blancher, and common kitchen utensils such as a paring knife, ladle, and measuring spoons. The Ball brand fresh preserving products also offers
I'm not
the tools to
spokesperson
safely
for
and
Ball,
easily
so-
handle hot jars and lids, fill jars, and measure headspace. A jar lifter, lid lifter, funnel, and bubble remover and headspace tool are all included in the Ball utensil set for preserving. First, you want to prepare your jars, lids, and bands. We will be using quart or 32-ounce wide mouth jars, which have a larger mouth opening to easily fill the jars with tomatoes. Be sure to check jars for nicks or cracks. Lids should be checked for even sealing compound. Wash jars, lids, and bands in hot soapy water. Red swell. Dry bands and set them in your work area. Keep jars and lids in hot water, not boiling, until ready for use. Jars need to be hot to prevent jar breakage when hot food is added. To prevent seal failure, do not boil lids. Leave bands at room temperature for easy handling. Next, prepare a boiling water canner by filling half full with water and keep water at a simmer while covered with lid until jars are filled and placed in canner. The home canning rack can be placed off to the side until ready for use. Now we are ready to prepare our tomatoes. All we will need to prepare our recipe is fresh tomatoes, lemon juice, and Ball Simple Creations preserving and pickling salt. Select fresh tomatoes at their peak of quality and flavor. Use firm tomatoes free of cracks and spots. Prepare only enough for one canner load. A canner, like the one we're using, fits up to 7 quart jars. You will need about 2.5 to 3.5 pounds of tomatoes for each quart jar. Wash your tomatoes and then drain. Place tomatoes in a wire basket and lower into a large sauce pot of boiling water. Blanch the tomatoes in boiling water for 30 to 60 seconds until the skins start to crack. Immediately plunge tomatoes into a bowl of cold water and slip the skins off. Cut out cores and remove any bruised or discolored portions that become apparent after blanching. You can leave tomatoes whole or cut into halves or quarters. Now that we have prepared our tomatoes, we can begin packing them into the jars. You can pack tomatoes using the raw pack method, where you do not keep the tomatoes. Or you can use the hot pack method, where you bring the tomatoes, covered with water, to a boil and heat for 5 minutes. Today we are going to be using the raw pack method. First, bring about 4 cups water to a boil in a medium saucepan. Remove hot jar from hot water, emptying out excess water, and set on a dish towel. Add 2 tablespoons lemon juice to each quart jar. If using salt, add 1 teaspoon to each quart jar. Carefully pack tomatoes into hot jars, leaving a 1/2 inch
That's
headspace.
the little step tool.
Ladle boiling water over tomatoes. If using the hot pack method, you can use the cooking liquid. Remove air bubbles by sliding a non-metallic spatula, such as the bubble remover tool, between the jar and tomatoes to release trapped air and ensure proper headspace during processing. Repeat around the jar 2 to 3 times. Clean rim and threads of jar with a clean damp cloth to remove any food residue. Remove lid from hot water. Center hot lid on jar, allowing sealing compound to come in contact with the jar rim. Apply band and adjust until fit is fingertip tight. Place filled jars in canner until recipe is used or canner is full. Carefully lower rack with filled jars into hot water. Be sure the jars are covered by 1 to 2 inches of water and add hot water if necessary. Place lid on canner and bring to a gentle, steady boil. Process jars in the boiling water for 45 minutes for quart jars, a adjusting for altitude. If using pint jars, process for 40 minutes. After processing time is complete, turn off the heat and remove canner lid. Allow jars to stand in canner for 5 minutes to get acclimated to the outside temperature. Remove jars from canner and set upright on a towel to prevent jar breakage that can occur from large temperature differences. Leave jars undisturbed for 12 to 24 hours. Bands should not be retightened as this may interfere with the sealing process. Check lids for seals. Lids should not flex up and down when center is pressed. Remove bands. You can also check for a seal by trying to gently lift the lid off the jar with your fingertips. If it cannot be lifted off, the lid has a good seal. If the lid does not seal within 24 hours, it can be immediately reprocessed or refrigerated. Clean jars and lids by wiping with a clean damp cloth. Label and store in a cool, dry, dark place for up to 1 year. Canned tomatoes, whether whole or diced, are versatile and can be used as a base for many delicious recipes. For more recipe ideas, visit the recipe section of our website at freshpreserving.com. Thanks for watching our home canning demonstration.
So that, if you want to watch that again, all you need to go is to YouTube. You can type in canning tomatoes, and then I put maybe gall, and then you'll see this come up, and you could watch that again if you want. But that kind of gives you a nice overview of how to can. Now that was just tomatoes, but it's pretty much the same process, you know, whether you're doing pickles or spaghetti sauce or jams and jellies. The jams and jellies are a little different because you're cooking that on the stove, but it's that similar process. Now, did you notice anything about doing the tomatoes that they recommend that you do? The lemon juice, right. How many of you, when you make tomato stuff, put lemon juice in? If you do tomatoes, okay. It's important that you do acidify your tomatoes by putting in the 2 tablespoons of lemon juice per quart. You can also use citric acid if you want. Vinegar is another option, but vinegar, you really have that vinegary taste to it. A lot of people are really concerned because they'll say, well, if I put lemon juice in my tomatoes, they're going to taste, you know, it's going to make them really sour and they're not going to taste very good. The lemon juice does not affect the taste of the tomatoes. You would never even know it's in there. But it does raise that pH level of it and makes it more acid. So, or actually lowers the pH. I always get this mixed up. If it's at a 7, it's a low acid food, and if it's 4.6 or below, it's an acid food. so it just makes it more acid, which is important. The reason for that is tomatoes, through hybridization and different varieties that are out there and available, they're not as acid as they used to be in the old days. So in order to be able to process them in a boiling water canner, they recommend that you acidify them so that you make them acid so that they're safe. So you don't have any problems with botulism in them. So just as a, something strongly I advise you to do so you make sure that they're safe. When it comes to jams and jellies, there are lots of different recipes for jams and jellies. And you can make jams without adding any pectin to it. Pectin is basically a natural part of fruit, and it's what causes jams and jellies to gel. If you don't have enough pectin, you're going to end up with this wonderful syrup that you can put on pancakes or ice cream, but you're not going to have jams or jellies. So you have to make sure that you do have enough pectin. So there are recipes that you don't have added pectin to. The biggest thing with those recipes is you have to cook them for a very long time, and you have to stir constantly, and you have to make sure that they reach the right gelling point. So it's a little tricky doing it without added pectin. You can also add liquid pectin or a powdered pectin, and there's other brands of powdered pectin that you can do. The two are very similar as far as the recipe goes. It's just when you add the pectin. At the powdered pectin, you add it at the beginning. The liquid pectin, you add it at the end. And all you have to do is follow the directions on the back of this. And then for your jellies, usually process those for 5 minutes and jams for 10. There are other brands that you can use that are called low or no sugar pectin. A lot of people want to make jams and jellies without any added sugar. And you can do that But you will need to use a special type of pectin that says low or no sugar added, and you can follow the directions right on that. There's another type that's, it's called Panoma's Universal Pectin. That's another brand that's a very low sugar or no sugar type of pectin. The thing I find with these types of low sugar pectins is sometimes it changes the consistency of the jam or jelly. It's not quite as smooth. It gets a little grainy sometimes. But certainly is an option if you want to try to reduce sugar. With the added pectins, okay, what you're going to find is for this one, for their cooked recipe, you use 1 pouch of pectin, and then you have to add 7 cups of sugar. Now, 7 cups of sugar is just about equivalent to a 5-pound bag of sugar, which is a little bit left of that. So when you read these recipes and you go, oh my gosh, there's so much sugar in there, well, sugar is one of the reasons why you get the gel to form. So that's why there's so much sugar in there, is because you need that sugar for it to gel. When people call me and say, oh, Alice, my strawberry jam just didn't gel this year, what I do wrong? I ask them, did you follow the recipe exactly? A lot of times they say, well, there was so much sugar, so I just cut back on it. Well, that's why it didn't gel, is because they didn't use all the sugar that's there. So this low sugar type of pectin is a different type of pectin compared to what's in here. So that's why there's different recipes. So just, again, always follow the recipe on either the container or in the bottle. Any questions at all about, oh, the other thing, okay, go ahead.
No sugar pectin that we were talking about. Now,
This is balls pudding, but
right,
there's a,
you don't use any sugars at all with that, right?
I believe that you don't. Sometimes I think you can do it, so it depends on the recipe, but some of them it's less, and then some of them there's like no. I know the Panoma's Universal Pectin uses no sugar whatsoever.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you can do it with no sugar.
Okay. You don't have any of that?
I don't have it, I don't have a box.
Panoma's?
It's Panoma's, yeah, I think it's Panomas or something like that. Universal Pectin.
Universal.
Yeah.
How about corn syrup?
Corn syrup, again, that's different than sugar. So because it's liquid, it's going to affect the gel of your product. So it's not going to work as well. Same thing if you add honey or maple syrup. Those things are going to affect the gel. So it's fine if you want syrup, but if you want jam, I always use the liquid pectin. That's just because I like that better than the powder pectin, but there's really no difference between the two. And the reason why I always add pectin is because I know it's going to come out right, and I'm going to get jam or jelly. When you don't use it, and I don't have 45 minutes to sit there and stir and cook without the pectin. Some people get really uptight about pectin. It's like, I'm adding something that's not natural into my jams and jellies. Pectin is a natural part of the fruit. I think usually when they get pectin, they get it from the rinds of lemons, are very high in pectin. Apples are also high in pectin, so that could be another source for it too. So it's a natural part of it, and it's not like you're adding, an artificial ingredient. Pickles. How have people done with pickles? Have you had good success with them? No. What's happened to your pickles?
Soft.
They get soft? Okay.
And they just don't taste very good.
And they don't taste very good. Okay. I can't tell you exactly what went wrong, but did you cut off the blossom end of your pickle before you put it in?
It's been a while. I gave up doing pickles because I just didn't have success.
Okay.
Not the blossom.
Right. On the pickle, or on the cucumber rather, ooh, these are getting really slimy here. On the blossom end, which I believe is this end right here, there are lots of enzymes right on the end of this where the blossom is. So they recommend that you cut off a 1/16 of an inch at least of that. I usually give a good little chunk there. And then that gets rid of the enzymes. If you leave that on, what happens is those enzymes eventually start to cause your cucumber or your pickle to get soft, and it's not a good product. So by cutting it off, that keeps your pickles a lot crisper than leaving it
You're
there.
talking about once you pull them out of the garden, do it, or?
Well, no, once you're ready to actually do the pickles,
Right,
so, don't cut it off then, because then you gotta refrigerate it.
right.
Okay, so do it once you're ready to do the pickles. in the ball video, they showed you using pickling or canning salt. Does anybody know why you can't use like good old regular Morton salt to put in your jars? Right, so there's iodine, which can change the color, yep, and there's another reason too.
The kosher salt and pickles all measure differently than each other.
That's a very good point too, and there's one other thing too. The actual Morton salt, you know why it's free pouring? Is because they put an anti-caking preservative or additive in there so it doesn't clump. And as a result, if you put that in your pickles will get very cloudy. The liquid will be very cloudy as opposed to nice and clear like this. When you use your vinegar, make sure you use vinegar that is 5% acidity, so check the labels to make sure that you're using vinegar. It just depends on the flavor from apple cider versus white vinegar, what you like or what the recipe's calling for. But don't dilute it or anything like that. And then a lot of times they used to add firming agents to pickles, again, to make them crisper. Usually you don't need to do that if you cut that blossom off. Whenever you pull your products out of your cupboard, you always want to inspect the jar and look for spoilage. Look for any mold on the jar. Is it bubbling? Is the liquid cloudy? When you open it, if stuff spurts out, then that's not good. Has an off odor to it or anything like that. If you do detect anything that's spoiled, again, do not taste it. If you've opened the jar, you need to take the contents out and boil them and then dispose of them properly, make sure that no animals can get into them. But if the jar is still sealed but yet it's bubbling, I would just wrap the jar in newspaper and just throw the whole thing out. Don't mess with opening it, because if there is botulism in there, that could cause some contamination in your kitchen. It could be a problem. No, do not put it in the compost pile. No. Throw it away. And any questions, when in doubt, throw it out. One thing that I did, these were the, I wanted to make some pickles, and I wanted to do them really quick. And I had this ball bread and butter pickling spice. And I looked at it and I was like, oh, this is pretty easy. So all I had to do was slice the cucumbers, put them in the jar, mix this with some water and the right amount of vinegar or whatever the recipe was, pour the hot liquid on the jars, and then process it. So I thought, oh, great. So I recently just opened a jar of these, and they're pretty good. They're not bad. But I do like my homemade bread and butter pickles with the onions in there a lot better than this. The other thing I noticed is that this jar is not too bad, but I have some jars that there's quite a bit of liquid down here on the bottom, and the pickles kind of float into the top. And I think the reason why that happened is because I did a raw pack with the cucumbers in there, then poured the hot liquid on. When you process it, it basically kind of cooks it a little bit, and so the pickles probably shrunk a little bit, and then made more room for that. Either that, or there was some air trapped in there that I didn't release with my bubble wand as well as I should have. Sometimes too, you'll get product, you can kind of see there's some pickles floating above the liquid there. That may turn brown or discolor. You might have that with peaches, that sometimes they get above the liquid and discolor a little bit. They're still safe to eat. It's just aesthetically they don't look very good. But so just so you know that, if you see that there's a good seal, there's no mold or anything, but they're a little brown on the top because it's above the liquid, it's still okay. All right, so any questions at all about canning? I wanted to just quickly talk a little bit about freezing and drying too with people. Okay, if you think of something, that's fine. So we know when we freeze food, basically what happens is the water in the cells freezes, causes the cells to rupture, and so food gets usually very soft after it's been frozen. Some foods freeze better than others, like sometimes you have, you'll see my tomato in the next picture that it doesn't freeze very well. One of the things you have to remember with freezing fruits and vegetables is they all contain enzymes. And enzymes can affect your color and your texture, your flavor of your fruits and vegetables. So it's important that we deactivate those enzymes before we freeze them. Because freezing does not get rid of the enzymes, it just, and those enzymes can continue to kind of work on the plant material while it's in the freezer. So, as I said, it's slowed, but it's not destroyed during freezing. So there's our tomato that's been frozen. You know, you can see it's just sort of, everything's sort of ruptured. And as I mentioned earlier, some foods just do not freeze well, like lettuce does not really freeze all that well. So what you want to do is you want to deactivate the enzymes that are in, particularly that are in vegetables. And the way you can deactivate those enzymes is through blanching. And they showed you in the video there, the blanching of the tomatoes, dipping in hot water and then cold water. That's basically what blanching does. And it destroys the enzymes in vegetables. So as a result, your products don't get soft while they're in the freezer. It also softens them, so it makes them a little easier to package, and it can remove some microorganisms. The thing to remember though is under blanching is worse than not blanching at all, because that can actually stimulate the enzymes. And if you have your if you picked up one of the freezing fact sheets, you'll notice there it gives you a whole time of how long to blanch different fruits, or actually vegetables. And you can do that by doing it in the boiling water and in the cold water, or you can also steam blanch too, would be another way that you can blanch. But make sure you deactivate the enzymes, because that's going to give you a better product in the long run. If you don't, well, it's not going to hurt you if you eat them, but you know, it's just not going to be as good a product. In fruits, what happens with enzymes is they oftentimes cause the fruit to darken. You notice that when you ever cut an apple and you let it sit out for a while, it starts to turn brown. Well, that's the enzymes in the apple reacting with the oxygen and in the air, and it causes it to brown. So what helps to prevent that is to put the fruit that you're cutting up to freeze in a mixture of ascorbic acid. And basically, ascorbic acid is vitamin C. And what you need is 1 teaspoon of ascorbic acid to a gallon of water. So you might get a big pot. Usually what I do, like if I'm going to freeze apples, I'll just fill this up with a gallon of water. I'll put my teaspoon of ascorbic acid in there. As I cut the apples, I'll throw them in there. And it doesn't change the flavor. It's not like lemon juice or vinegar or anything like that. It doesn't change the flavor, but it prevents the apples from turning brown as I do that. They do have commercial ascorbic acid mixtures. I think Fruit Fresh is ascorbic acid, but I'm not sure. I never read the package to see what that is. You can also heat the fruit. That will help prevent browning, but again, that changes the texture, softens it a little bit. You know, lemon juice, salt and vinegar solutions, things like that, they just really don't work as well as the ascorbic acid. To make it, it's pretty easy. All you need to do is buy a bottle of vitamin C tablets. Most of the time they come in 500 milligrams. And 1 teaspoon of ascorbic acid equals 3,000 milligrams of vitamin C. So you need 500 into 3,000 is 6. So you take 6 tablets, crunch them up. You know, either take a hammer to them and pound them, or however you can get them scrunched up, and then just put them in the water, have them dissolve, and then you put your apples in there, and then when you're ready to pack them, then you can just pull your apples out and drain them, and then put them into your container, and they'll stay nice and white. When you pack fruit, you can also do other types of packs. You can do a syrup pack or a sugar pack, which is basically sprinkling sugar over the fruit and then putting it in the freezer. You can do a dry pack where you don't put anything on them. You can also put water, put pack in water or juice or a pectin syrup. All of those things are fine too. It just depends what you want to do. I know with my blueberries, basically my blueberries come off because they're wild. They come off the bush. I don't wash them beforehand. I just put them in the bags because they're dry and they freeze beautifully. Strawberries, I've frozen those dry. Just hull them and put them in the bag and they're fine. Other times I put them in maybe a little sugar syrup in that too. So it just depends on your taste and what you'd like to do. Whatever you put them into, make sure that they are a freezer container, because you don't want your food to absorb all the odors from your freezer and taste like freezer when you go to eat it. So make sure it's vapor proof and it's not going to leak all over the place. And then label and date it too is a good idea. If your freezer's at 0, you're going to have your produce for a long time. However, as your temperature of your freezer goes up, sometimes people have it a little higher because 0-degree ice cream is really hard to scoop out, so they might want it a little softer, so they might have it a little higher. It's going to decrease the length of storage. So, I recommend that you do it at 0 degrees, and that's going to have the best length of storage. Does anybody do drying at all? Yeah, you have, what kind of things have you done with in drying?
Pineapples, tomatoes, peppers,
Oh, okay.
what else? Oranges.
Mm-hmm. And do you have a food dehydrator?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. How about yourself?
Pretty much the same stuff. I did some jalapenos once. My husband likes.
Oh, those must have been really good.
Yeah, garlic.
Oh,
More of that.
uh-huh.
For garlic salt and stuff.
Mhm. Okay. Anybody else? Leather, oh, you've done some fruit leathers? Mhm, mhm. And do you have a dehydrator that you use? Okay. Basically, when you dry food, remember that whole bacteria needs moisture to grow? Well, basically, when you dry food, you're removing the moisture, and that's what preserves the food. So that's what helps with it. But still, you have to be careful because if you don't dry it completely and there's still moisture there, you can still get bacteria, yeast, or mold growing on it. And it also slows down those whole enzymes in the fruits and vegetables. They recommend that the optimum temperature for drying is about 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, there are different ways that people try to have that accomplished, that's the next slide, I'm getting ahead of myself there. When you do really high temperatures, what happens is it tends to cook the food as opposed to dry it. And in some cases, what can happen is you can get what's known as case hardening, where the outside of the produce may be dry, but the inside is still really wet and moist, and as a result, it spoils and gets moldy. So the best way to dry food is with the dehydrator.